ἐγείρει, and welcome. Today we're going to be doing a bit of a special video. This is for Resurrection Sunday, so very happy Resurrection Sunday to all of you. We're going to be looking at Romans 6:4, as it says right there. Not because this is the text for this Sunday, but because I think that this is a very good verse that is closely related to the historical events of this last week. So here is our rubric, everything that we're looking for as we go through this text. Let's go ahead and get started. Sun te phaemen un autoi dia tu baptismatos eis ton thanaton, hina hosper ἐγείρθη Christos ek nekron dia tes doxes tu patros, houtos kai hemes en kai noteti zoes peripatesomen. And that's as far as we're going to get. So our very first word is also a verb, which is very nice. We have our prefix sun, which tells us it's a special type of verb. That means it is normally going to take the dative as its object rather than the accusative. Take a look ahead. We've got men right there, so that's going to be a first person plural. And then our stem is etaphe. So since we've got that phi right there and that eta right there, we should know automatically that it is not a present tense. That that epsilon is probably the augmenting vowel, so that will tell us that it is a past tense. And then we would need to know the personal parts of this verb here to tell us exactly which one it is. So this verb is sun thopto. So we can see that the P and the tau right there, they combine together, and that's what got this phi, that theta, turned into a tau because of the augmenting vowel in front of it. So we have a huge change in the stem. And it turns out that this is actually the sixth principal part, which makes it an aorist passive. And it is, of course, indicative. Because it's ein, ace, a, amen for the endings in the aorist passive. Okay, and this one means we were buried together with. And un is, of course, a word that just means therefore. I'm going to move its translation over here. So and this should automatically tell us that there's a little bit more context for this verse than we actually have here. So verse 3, and of course through 1 of Romans chapter 6, and technically even the entire book, are all the context leading up to this. So I encourage you to go and read that on your own. So we've got autoi right here, which we can see has this sub iota, and that tells us that this is a dative singular. And it's going to be masculine. Context would tell us, especially since we've got Christos right there. So this makes this the object of sun ta phaemen. So it would just be with him. No need to include the to because we've already got the idea in there with together or with right there. Dia is a preposition, so we know that this is going to have an object. We have a genitive there. Baptismatos, that also looks like a third declension genitive. Ace is a new preposition, so it has to close off right there, which means that dia in this case is taking the genitive, and we would translate it as through. Tu baptismatos, omicron sigma, especially with this article, tell us that this is a third declension genitive. And singular, of course. And this noun is, I believe, neuter. Baptismatos. I think most third declensions that end in alpha for their nominative are neuter. Through the particular baptism. Ace is going to take the accusative we see here with ton and thanaton. We've got hina, so that tells us that this does in fact end our prepositional phrase right there, plus accusative. And that's going to be singular. And this word is masculine, thanatos. Yes. Into the particular death. And we'll understand whose death in the context later. Hina. Hina is our particle that normally introduces a purpose clause. So I'm going to leave that untranslated for the moment and move on until we find our verb, which is not host pair, but it is ἐγείρει. That theta eta right there, especially with this eta here in the front, our augmenting vowel, tells us this is another aorist passive, and just singular eta as our ending, it tells us that this is third person singular. And it is also indicative. Okay, now we look ahead. Christos, we get omicron sigma there for nominative singular masculine. We have our subject, which is nice. Immediately behind our verb, very Jewish, if you will. This is the way that, and I don't know if I've talked about this before, and mind you, in no way am I an excellent expert in how Aramaic or Hebrew works, but the little that I understand at this point is normally in Hebrew, the sentence starts with the verb and the subject will come pretty close thereafter. So this sentence isn't starting with the verb, but that's due to Greek rules of language. Hina has to start the clause. Host pair, it needs to be at the very near the beginning at the very least. Hina is preventing it from being the first word, and it wouldn't make as much sense there. So ἐγείρει is as close to the front as Greek will allow it, even though Greek would normally want the verb to be at the very end. We would almost even expect for this clause the main verb to be after the secondary clause in this purpose clause. But this, gosh, now I've forgotten which one it is. It's either the protasis or the apodosis. But this at the beginning really shows its Jewish writer's origin. Anyway, Christ has been raised, or was raised. Now we can move back over here, host pair. And host pair means just as. And it could technically also mean even as. However, I would really only expect that if it were chi pair. That's the normal one we would translate as even. Hina, in order that, since we have these two right next to each other, Hina is going to be introducing the primary part of the purpose clause. Host pair is actually introducing the secondary part of the purpose clause. So the Greek here has swapped the places where we'd like to be in order that blah, 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 just as Christ has been raised. This is what we would like as Americans. Ek is a prepositional phrase. Got necron and the genitive. Dia is a new preposition. So you have to end it right there. Genitive plural plus genitive. And since we don't have an article with this, we can't be exactly certain of the gender. So this is a adjective, I believe. So what we would do there is we'd either leave it blank, which is just so disappointing. You wouldn't want to do that, especially not me. So the best option then would be to identify it as its probable masculine, because if you recall, masculine is the generic form when when neuter isn't used. So masculine generic for necron, from or out of, or from, let's do from again, dead, understanding that it is plural. Dia tes doxes, two, got another genitive right there, so this one has to be taking the genitive at this point, which means it's going to be the same meaning right there. I'm going to go ahead and write that in. Now, determining which of these two genitives is the correct object of this preposition, we need to try them both. So this is genitive singular feminine with that article. Tu patros is genitive singular and masculine. So first option is through the glory of the Father. Second option is through the Father of the glory. Now, technically either one could work, but doxes as the object of the preposition I think makes a little bit more sense. I'm going to put the pair in right there. Of the Father. hutos, thus. Kai, this one could be and or also. I'm going to put and for the moment because that's the normal translation. He mace, epsilon, iota, sigma on that personal pronoun. We know that this marks it as either the nominative plural or the accusative plural. So we want to take a look ahead at our verb. Noop, noop, noop. Aha, here we go. Men. And this is going to be a first person personal pronoun. So with that on the verb, we know that this is nominative. Plural as our subject. And it makes it emphatic. Because we wouldn't really need that right there. In. This one looks like, with that iota right there, looks like it's taking a third declension dative. We should actually get back to that in a minute and instead handle our verb right here. Peri, say prefix onto our verb, pate somen. Got that sigma and that eta right there, which tell us that this can't be the present. It could either be the aorist or the future. Then looking ahead, we've got this omega right there, which is not a normal connecting vowel for our verbs, except in the subjunctive. So then that would explain why there's no augmenting vowel right there. In order for this to be future, we would need the eta and the sigma, no augmenting vowel between peri and pat, and then omega would actually want to be omicron. But since we have omega, it can't be future. It also can't have an augmenting vowel. Subjunctives never have augmenting vowels except in weird exceptions, which I don't know that I've actually seen in years. So aorist is our only option. Let's see, first person, it's plural, aorist, active, and subjunctive. Is that how I mark subjunctives? Yes, it is still how I mark subjunctives. Okay, so then this just tells us that, yeah, this is in fact a purpose clause. Very nice. Purpose clauses want subjunctive verbs. Now we can move back. This, genitive there, dative there. This has to enter prepositional phrase. And this means we live, we walk about our life. And I forget what the third translation is, but we live, I think, is the one that I'm going to go with. And remember that in English, most often you don't have to translate a subjunctive as a subjunctive unless it's a specific type. If it's an independent use of the subjunctive, I think you do need to translate it that way. But since we have a dependent use of the subjunctive in a purpose clause, translating it indicatively makes sense. All right. Oop. Okay, now we can come back to our prepositional phrase. And this is dative singular, and the word is feminine. In newness. But before we move on to Zois, there's actually something very interesting about this word. When I was looking it up in BDAG, I discovered that it has a special meaning. It doesn't just mean in newness. It's got the direct connotation of an extraordinary newness or an unusual newness to it. So because that is an option here, and honestly most English translations miss a lot of these things, which is very unfortunate. They don't translate the middle properly when they run across it. They don't translate things like this properly when they run across it. I know English translators want the English to be readable, and sometimes including all the individual details of the words, it gets in the way. Amplified Bible being an instance. Oh gosh, I don't like that Bible. So it can be an issue. And you of course want to avoid going too much for an accurate, strictly accurate translation, because then you can lose the meaning. But something like the meaning of this one, or the meaning of the middle verbs, usually wouldn't take away from that. It'll actually tell the reader a lot more of what's going on than a lot of the translations do these days. And I wish I could give you specific instances, but don't remember them. Too many things to remember. So, including the word extraordinary. Zois, eta sigma right there is a genitive singular feminine of life. There we go. That is the entire translation. All right, let's take a look at this from its own context. Therefore, we were buried together with him through the particular baptism into the death. Whose death? Christ's death. In order that just as Christ has been raised from the dead, I'm adding an article in there because it's plural, through the glory of the Father, thus and also makes a lot more sense there. Thus also we live. We ourselves live, we should say, because of the emphatic nature of that, live in extraordinary newness of life. Okay, so what does this have to do with Resurrection Sunday? That's the big thing right there. This is talking about Christ's death and how we have been baptized as Christians into Christ's death. We have taken on his death. We have taken on Christ himself. And because of that, we have been made alive. Prior to becoming Christian, prior to being saved by Christ, we are all dead in our trespasses and in our sins. We were part of that dead right there. But because of Christ, because of his death on the cross back on Friday, because he rose again on this historic day back in history, because we have been baptized, we are no longer dead to sin. Instead, we are dead with Christ, which means we have been raised. We have been given hope of eternal life. We have been given an extraordinarily new life. Everything has changed now. And we do live, we truly live in him. Now, some of you, depending on what your denomination is, probably going to disagree with me every time I've brought up baptism. I understand that. For baptism, for the regenerative nature, the effective nature of it that God has put into it, I take that from how the Greek is what the Greek is in each of the passages talking about it. And that is something, since you're watching this, you probably know Greek, and you can and you should go and you should look these passages up and try to prove me wrong. I'm not, but then again, I could just be a really arrogant arse right now. Sorry for everybody in Australia. All one of you. So, there we go. It's Romans chapter 6. I hope taking a look at this has been helpful for you. Ἐγείρει.